I don't know who I came to talk to today, but I need to ask you something bold. Are you ready to step into the next chapter that God has written just for you? Because see, we serve a God who doesn't write in pencil. He doesn't draft your story hoping it all works out, no. He authors it with divine certainty. Every page of your life, even the messy ones, even the ones you tried to tear out, He's already redeemed them for purpose. You've been standing in the hallway, afraid to open the door to what's next. But I came to tell you today that door ain't locked, baby. You're not stuck. You're being positioned. God didn't bring you this far to leave you now. You may feel unqualified, you may feel unprepared, but favor has a way of falling on those who say yes in faith before they see the full picture. So my question again is simple. Are you ready? Not ready in your strength, not ready in your perfection, but ready in your spirit, ready to trust, ready to obey, ready to move even if you have to move scared. Because if you can say yes, even with trembling hands, you're about to walk into a chapter so rich with purpose, so soaked in grace, that your past won't even recognize you anymore. If you're listening to this message today, it's not by accident. God has a way of getting our attention when He's about to do something new. Perhaps you've been sensing it, a shift, a stirring, something that won't leave you alone no matter how much you try to stay comfortable where you are. That restlessness isn't something to ignore. It's God preparing your heart for transition. He's not calling you to stay where you've always been. He's inviting you to step forward into the next chapter of your life that He has already written with care, precision, and purpose. But before any of us can walk into that new chapter, we have to ask ourselves an honest question. Are we ready? Now when I say ready, I'm not talking about having all the answers. God is not asking you to come with certainty. He's asking you to come with faith. Faith doesn't mean understanding everything. Faith means trusting the one who does. You see, God never moves us without preparing the way. He is a God of order, a God of timing, and a God who leads us with purpose. Every transition in your life, every door that closed, every relationship that changed, every job that ended, and every season that shifted, none of it was random. It was preparation. When God led Abraham away from everything familiar, He didn't give him the full picture. He said, "Go to the land I will show you, and not the land I've already shown you, not the land with a map and GPS coordinates. No, the land I will show you." Abraham had to walk by faith, and every step brought him closer to God's promise. You are no different. God is not asking you to figure it out. He is asking you to follow. Now maybe you're saying, "But I'm not sure if I can do this. I've made mistakes. I've missed opportunities. I've wasted time." Friend, if your next chapter depended on your perfection, none of us would qualify. But the good news is that God's plans for you are not based on your performance. They're based on His grace. He uses broken people, flawed people, people with pasts, because when He writes your story, He gets the glory. You're not disqualified. You're being refined. Too many of us are holding back because we think we have to feel strong before we move. But strength comes in the going. God told Joshua, "Be strong and courageous," and not after the victory, before the battle even began. That's because courage is not a feeling, it's a decision. And when you make the decision to obey God, even when you're scared, even when you don't have all the pieces, even when you're unsure, you activate His power in your life in a whole new way. Sometimes stepping into the next chapter means letting go of what was. That's not always easy. We like what's familiar even when it no longer serves us. But if you're constantly looking back, you can't move forward. The children of Israel were out of Egypt, but Egypt wasn't out of them. They kept longing for the place God had delivered them from because they were uncomfortable in the wilderness. The wilderness is often the hallway between chapters. It's the space where God shapes you for where you're going. Don't despise it. Don't rush it. Let it do its work. The wilderness isn't punishment, it's preparation. It's in the wilderness that you learn to depend on God. It's in the wilderness that your character is strengthened. And it's in the wilderness that you learn to hear His voice clearly without all the noise. When God is getting ready to elevate you, He often isolates you first. Don't mistake that quiet season for rejection. It may just be the sacred space where God is writing your next chapter in silence. One of the reasons we resist stepping into the new is because we fear the unknown. But let me remind you of something important. God goes before you. He's already in your next chapter. He's already walked the road. He's already made the provisions. Your job is not to make the path. Your job is to follow the shepherd. Psalm 23 says he leads me and not pushes. Not drags, leads. That means he's always ahead of you. You're not stepping into uncertainty, you're stepping into his will. Obedience is the key. You don't need a full blueprint to say yes. Sometimes your next move doesn't make sense to anyone else. But if God is calling you, your obedience will unlock things you can't even see yet. Think about Peter. When Jesus said, "Come," Peter stepped out of the boat onto water. Now Peter didn't walk on water because the water became solid. Peter walked on water because he walked on the Word. That's what faith looks like, walking on what God said, even when your feet can't feel the ground. That's the kind of obedience that shifts lives. That's the kind of faith that opens new chapters, not because we're so great, but because God is so faithful. He cannot lie. If he said there's more for you, then there is. If he said he's with you, then he is. If he said he'll provide, then he will. You just have to trust him enough to take the next step. You see, stepping into the next chapter doesn't mean the journey will be easy. It means it will be worth it. It means your story isn't over. It means the God who began a good work in you is not finished. He's still writing, and no matter how many pages you think you've messed up, he knows how to redeem every line. God doesn't need perfect people, he needs surrendered ones. He's not looking for ability as much as availability. So let me ask you again, are you ready? Are you ready to leave behind fear? Are you ready to say yes even if your voice shakes? Are you ready to trust that God's hand is on you even when you feel invisible? Because if you are, then heaven is leaning in. The next chapter is not just about you, it's about what God wants to do through you. Lives are waiting on your obedience. Your children are watching your faith. Your breakthrough may be tied to someone else's deliverance. So don't delay. Don't shrink back. Don't let doubt rob you of what God has already declared. You were made for more. You've been prepared for this. And the same God who brought you this far will carry you the rest of the way. So stand up in your spirit. Shake the dust off disappointment. Silence the lies of the enemy. And step forward in faith. The next chapter is calling. Are you ready? Because God is. One of the most important things we must come to understand as believers is that God doesn't operate according to our timelines or expectations. He operates according to his divine plan, and his plan is not random. It is precise. It is intentional. It is designed not only to bless us, but to grow us, refine us, and draw us closer to him. The next chapter of your life is not just about new opportunities or fresh starts. It is about divine alignment. God is not simply trying to get you to a new destination. He is trying to make you into the kind of person who can thrive once you get there. When God is preparing you for a new chapter, it will often require a separation. Not just from unhealthy relationships or environments, though sometimes that is necessary, but from certain mindsets, attitudes, and behaviors that have kept you bound. He will call you to release what is familiar in order to embrace what is faithful. You cannot hold on to the old and step fully into the new. The Lord makes it clear in Isaiah 43:18-19. Forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. The problem for many of us is not that God hasn't started doing something new, it's that we're still emotionally attached to the old. There is no growth in staying where you are. Comfort may feel safe, but comfort can become a prison if you're not careful. Sometimes God has to shake up our normal so that we can discover our calling. If you're always clinging to what was, you'll never reach out and take hold of what could be. You were not created to remain stuck in the same cycles, repeating the same patterns, living below your spiritual potential. You were made to bear fruit, and fruit only comes when we are planted in the right soil with the willingness to be pruned. Pruning is not punishment, it is preparation. God removes what no longer serves his purpose in your life so that you can make room for what does. And while that process can be painful, it is also holy. It's a sign that he's taking you seriously. He is not a careless gardener. When he prunes, he's not cutting you down. He's cultivating you to grow deeper roots and bear greater fruit. Your next chapter requires a version of you that has learned to trust in the dark, obey in the uncertainty, and praise even when the promise isn't yet visible. We must also understand that God never asks us to move forward without also giving us what we need for the journey. He may not give us the whole plan, but he always gives us his presence. When Moses was called to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, he didn't feel ready. In fact, he gave God every excuse in the book. I can't speak well. I'm not the right person. They won't believe me. But God didn't change the assignment. He simply said, I will be with you. That was all Moses needed. That is all we need. The next chapter of your life will stretch you. It will likely demand more of you than the last one did. But it will also draw out of you gifts you didn't know you had, strength you didn't know you carried, and faith you didn't know you could walk in. God is not asking you to rely on your own power. He is calling you to trust in his. And when you do that, when you surrender your plans for his purpose, you will begin to see doors open that you never could have forced open on your own. Too often, we wait to feel strong before we say yes. But God doesn't wait for you to feel capable. He moves when you say yes in faith. Read through Scripture and you'll find that some of the greatest acts of obedience were done by people who felt anything but qualified. David was a shepherd boy. Esther was an orphan. Paul was a persecutor of Christians. Yet God used each one of them to turn the page on a new chapter, not just in their own lives, but in the lives of countless others. So if you feel inadequate, you're in good company. The call of God is rarely convenient. It will interrupt your plans, challenge your assumptions, and confront your fears. But it will also lead you to a place of peace, purpose, and spiritual fulfillment. What you have to decide is whether or not you trust him enough to take the step. Not a leap, just one step. That's how faith works. You don't need to see the entire staircase. You just need to obey the next instruction. God's plan doesn't unfold all at once. It reveals itself step by step, choice by choice, moment by moment. The next chapter of your life may start with a whisper, a small nudge in your spirit, a quiet conviction that something is shifting. Don't ignore that. Don't dismiss the still, small voice. That's how God often speaks, not with loud noise, but with deep clarity. He speaks peace into our chaos. He confirms his direction through his word. He reminds us of his promises even when our circumstances seem to contradict them. The truth is, God's promises are not based on how things look. They're based on who he is, and he is faithful. He is unchanging. He is sovereign. He knows the end from the beginning, and he wastes nothing. Not your pain, not your detours, not even your delays. Everything you've been through can be used for his glory when placed in his hands. Your scars become testimonies, your failures become fuel, your surrender becomes the gateway to the supernatural. If you've been wondering whether God still has more for you, let me tell you with full conviction, he does. If you've been questioning whether you're still called, you are. If you've been feeling forgotten or overlooked, you are not. God sees you, he knows you, he loves you, and he is ready to walk with you into what's next. But he will not force you. He invites, he calls, he knocks. You must respond. You must open the door. You must say yes. So are you ready? Not in the way the world defines readiness, not based on credentials or certainty or comfort, but ready in your spirit, ready to believe that your story isn't over, ready to trust the author of your life with the pen, ready to leave behind the safety of the shore and step out into deeper waters. God has not brought you this far just to keep you stagnant. He has prepared something greater, but the next chapter begins with your decision. Are you willing to say, Lord, not my will, but yours be done? Are you willing to follow even if you don't have all the answers? Are you willing to surrender your plan in exchange for his purpose? If the answer is yes, even a trembling yes, then get ready. The next chapter is waiting. And God is already there. There comes a moment in every believer's life where God gently presses us with a question, not because he needs the answer, but because we do. That question is simple, yet soul-searching. Do you trust me? Everything about stepping into the next chapter hinges on how we answer that question, not just with our words, but with our decisions, our obedience, and our willingness to surrender. God is not in the business of simply improving our circumstances. He's in the business of transforming us. And transformation is rarely comfortable. The next chapter of your life will not be built on convenience. It will be built on trust. That's why God often begins a new season by removing the things we've leaned on for too long. He'll close doors that don't honor him. He'll shift relationships that no longer serve your spiritual development. He'll even dry up certain wells that once sustained you, not to punish you, but to reposition your dependence. You see, we all say we want to go deeper, but depth requires digging, and digging disrupts the surface. God is trying to get beneath the surface of your faith. He's not satisfied with shallow roots. He wants you to be anchored. Because storms will come, delays will happen, the enemy will whisper lies, and unless you are deeply rooted in truth, you will be tempted to turn back when the road gets hard. God never promised us an easy journey. What he promised is that we wouldn't walk it alone. When the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness, they had a cloud by day and fire by night, constant, visible reminders that God was with them. But even with those signs, they struggled to trust. They complained. They doubted. They longed to return to slavery because slavery felt safer than the uncertainty of freedom. And that's what many of us do. We say we want change, but when the process begins, we long for what used to be. We retreat to the familiar instead of advancing in faith. That's why stepping into the next chapter requires not just a change of scenery, but a change of heart. It requires the willingness to believe that what God has ahead of you is better than what's behind you, not just circumstantially, but spiritually. Better doesn't always mean easier. Better means more fruitful, more aligned, more surrendered, and sometimes better means walking into a season that forces you to depend on God in ways you never have before. Maybe you're in that place right now. You feel the pull to something new, but you're afraid to let go. You sense God calling you to move, but you're unsure of where your feet will land. That's not a sign of weakness. That's the tension where faith is born. Real faith grows not in certainty, but in surrender. It's the willingness to take the next step without knowing the full path. It's the courage to obey God even when it feels costly. It's the decision to say, God, I don't know what's coming next, but I know you are good, and I know I can trust you. And that trust isn't built overnight. It comes through walking with God daily, listening to his voice, staying grounded in his word, and allowing the Holy Spirit to lead you step by step. The more time you spend in his presence, the more confidence you gain not in yourself, but in him. Because the truth is, you don't need to have everything figured out. You just need to be faithful. Sometimes the next chapter begins with a whisper, a nudge, a small act of obedience. You don't need a spotlight or a platform. You don't need a full strategy or a 5-year plan. You just need to be willing to say yes. Yes to God's timing. Yes to his refining. Yes to his process. Because your yes today sets the foundation for what he wants to build in your tomorrow. We often think that God is waiting for us to be ready. But readiness in the kingdom of God doesn't mean having it all together. It means having a heart that's willing. A spirit that says, Lord, I may not feel ready, but I choose to trust you. And that choice, even if it's made with trembling hands, is enough. God can work with that. In fact, he delights in using ordinary, unsure people to do extraordinary things. Look at Gideon. He was hiding in fear when God called him mighty warrior. He didn't feel qualified, but God wasn't looking at Gideon's feelings. He was looking at his own plan. God doesn't speak to you based on where you are. He speaks to you based on where he's taking you. That's why you have to be careful not to let your current season define you. You are not your past. You are not your failure. You are not your delay. You are a child of God, and your identity is rooted in his purpose for you. The next chapter will demand that you remember who you are and whose you are. There will be moments of uncertainty. There will be voices internal and external that try to make you doubt the call. But you must hold on to the truth of what God has spoken over your life. That truth is your anchor. That truth is your compass, and that truth will never fail. The world may measure success by results, but God measures it by obedience. Did you say yes when it didn't make sense? Did you trust him when the path wasn't clear? Did you keep walking when it would have been easier to give up? That's what matters to God. And when you walk in obedience, his favor goes before you. His peace surrounds you, his spirit strengthens you, so what is your next step? It might be small, starting the conversation God has been nudging you to have, taking the first step toward a new direction, leaving behind a toxic environment, forgiving someone who hurt you, or simply choosing to believe again after disappointment. Whatever it is, don't wait until you feel brave. Move in faith. God honors movement. He blesses forward motion. Even the smallest step taken in obedience carries the weight of heaven behind it. Don't underestimate what God can do with a surrendered heart. He specializes in using what's overlooked. He brings beauty from ashes. He restores what was lost. He multiplies what's surrendered, but you have to bring it to him. You have to lay your fears, your dreams, your questions, and your plans at his feet. He's not asking for perfection. He's asking for trust. So I'll ask again, are you ready? Not because the road will be easy, but because the one walking with you is faithful. Are you ready to believe that the best is not behind you, but ahead of you? Are you ready to walk by faith, even when you can't see the full picture? Because if you are, then take the step. The next chapter is not just coming, it's here. And your author is ready to write something new. There is a deep and quiet truth that every believer must come to accept before they can fully embrace the next chapter God has prepared for them. God's purpose for your life is not about speed, status, or success as the world defines it. His purpose is always about becoming more like Christ, more dependent on his Spirit, more anchored in his word, and more surrendered to his will. And that transformation doesn't happen in a hurry. It happens over time. It happens through seasons. It happens through submission. God often speaks through the rhythm of seasons. There is a time to wait, a time to move, a time to sow, a time to reap, a time to let go, and a time to reach forward. One of the hardest things to do as a believer is to discern when one season is ending and another is beginning. Because transitions don't always come with clarity. Sometimes they come with tension, with restlessness, with a sense that what used to fit no longer fits, and what used to satisfy no longer does. That tension is holy. It's not something to be feared or ignored. It's God stirring your spirit. It's his way of saying, pay attention, I'm shifting something. And in those moments, it is critical that we don't rush ahead of him, but also that we don't dig in our heels and resist the change he's initiating. The safest place you can be is in step with the Spirit, not behind him, not ahead of him, but walking with him. But walking with God means trusting him when the path is unfamiliar. It means learning to live not just by what you see, but by what you know to be true about him. That he is good, that he is faithful, that he is sovereign, and that he never leads his children into a place where his grace cannot sustain them. The Israelites had to learn this the hard way. God brought them out of Egypt with signs and wonders, yet their hearts still longed for the security of slavery. Freedom scared them because it meant walking by faith, and for many of us, the same is true. The next chapter of your life will require more than courage, it will require conviction. Conviction that God's way is better, even when it costs you comfort. Conviction that his promises are true, even when your circumstances say otherwise. Conviction that your life is not random, but purposeful, and that every moment up to this point has been preparing you for what comes next. You cannot step into what's next if you're still clinging to what's past. And that doesn't just mean letting go of failure, it also means letting go of success. Sometimes the greatest hindrance to your next chapter is your attachment to your last victory. We can become so comfortable with what worked in one season that we resist what God is doing in the next. But God is not a God of formulas. He is a God of faith. He may not move the same way twice, but he will always move according to his perfect will. That means you must be willing to listen, really listen for his voice. And his voice doesn't compete with noise. It whispers in quiet moments. It speaks through scripture. It confirms through peace. If your heart is cluttered with fear, comparison, distractions, or control, it will be very difficult to hear clearly. That's why part of stepping into your next chapter requires a cleansing, a spiritual decluttering, a removal of what dulls your spiritual senses. You cannot walk in discernment if your heart is divided. Ask yourself, what voices am I giving the most weight to in this season? Is it the voice of the world, the voice of fear, the voice of your past? Or is it the voice of the shepherd who said, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me"? If you want clarity about the future, you must return to the feet of Jesus in the present. He is not hiding his will from you, but he will not compete with your idols. You must choose to seek him first. That seeking requires intentionality. It means setting aside time each day to be still before God, to open His Word not just for information, but for transformation, to pray not just with a list of requests, but with a heart that says, "Lord, speak, I'm listening." This is how you align your spirit with His. This is how you prepare for the next chapter, not by striving, but by surrendering. And as you surrender, don't be surprised if God begins to shift things in your life. He may realign your relationships. He may close some doors that you were hoping would open. He may ask you to release something you thought you couldn't live without. But every act of divine removal is a setup for divine replacement. God never takes without the intention of giving something better, not always materially, but always spiritually. What He gives is Himself, His nearness, His peace, His guidance, His joy. If you've been walking through a season of uncertainty or loss, know this: God is not finished with your story. In fact, He often writes the most powerful chapters from the places of greatest pain. Don't let your current struggle convince you that your best days are behind you. With God, nothing is wasted. He redeems what was broken. He restores what was stolen. He revives what was dead. He renews what was weary, but you must allow Him to do it in His way and in His time. That means waiting when He says wait, moving when He says move, speaking when He gives the words, and being silent when He says be still. That is the rhythm of a life surrendered to the Spirit. And it is in that rhythm that you will find the grace to walk into your next chapter with confidence, not in yourself, but in the God who goes before you. There will still be challenges. There will still be days when fear tries to creep in. But when you know who you are, and more importantly, whose you are, you won't be shaken. You are a child of the Most High God. You are called, chosen, and equipped, and the same God who brought you this far will carry you the rest of the way. So ask yourself again, not with anxiety, but with expectancy: are you ready? Not ready as the world defines it, not ready with all the answers, but ready in your heart, ready to trust, ready to obey. Ready to let go of what was and embrace what's next, because the author of your story is not finished, and His next chapter for you is not just a continuation, it's a divine invitation. Step into it.